Good morning. I feel like they trotted out the old dinosaurs. I have not been on the road since pre-COVID, which is like a really long time. And as I was doing this, I got a pep talk from my 24-year-old. It said, "Dad, you can go out and do this," okay? Because I was going like, I used to do this like a couple days a month and get out with people and work with school improvement. But COVID like wiped everything out in terms of school improvement around the country for good reason. And so you lose confidence, you lose your edge. And so you think, well, wow, why are they having me come out here and do this? Because Patton does like the best work in school improvement, supporting stuff around the country. And I'm not saying that just to suck up to people. You guys do really great work. And I think Pennsylvania, for the tough work in terms of school improvement, does fantastic work. It's like really, really, really hard. And you have my admiration because I feel like it's Sisyphus. You know, we push this rock up the hill and then something happens. But I'm not going to be totally gloomy this morning because I think there are really important things that we can do. So first, let's establish some ground rules. We got an hour and 15 minutes, of which I've got about 40 years of content. I'm serious. I started working in school improvement in St. Paul schools in 1980 with about 4,000 children and families who recently arrived from Southeast Asia. Mostly white Hmong, blue Hmong tribes who had a written language in 1946, 1948. I am not white Hmong or blue Hmong. Okay. I also had a population that I was assigned to work with that spoke Spanish. And my Spanish, I could maybe communicate with a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, okay? And my job was to help sort through their learning needs. Oh my goodness, me? That was my job, okay? About 9,000. I worked with a team of people. You know, I'm like 28 years old. And my job is to help sort through that. I had a wonderful group of people to work with, and I banged my head against a wall with social service agencies, how things were done. Most of these kids had to be kids with disabilities, didn't they? That was the prevailing thought. They couldn't learn, etc. So here I am, how many years later? And we're talking about secondary, okay? This is going to be about 2 parts, okay? Even though the titles are kind of weird, this is not just about finding kids, labeling them as kids with disabilities, mostly SLD in secondary. This is about so much broader things than that. So if you're coming here to figure out the magic secret sauce as to find which kid has some kind of things that are broken with them, you're going to be horribly disappointed. If you think that I'm going to come and tell you that things like patterns of strengths and weaknesses are the ways that you find any kid as a kid eligible for special education, you can leave now because it's morally and psychometrically wrong. Please don't do that. Okay? Thank you, thank you. And if you're still doing ability achievement discrepancy, where you think that you can measure somebody what they're capable of, seriously, milk and jug thinking that cognitive ability sets an upper limit about what somebody can do, my goodness, that's 1930s thinking. And it is so racist, it is so wrong. Stop it, okay? Federal law said you could stop it in 2004, gang. So we're not going to talk about that stuff. We're going to talk about the big ideas about who we can serve, okay? in terms of MTSS, because if you can't figure out who you serve in MTSS, you cannot figure out how you serve them. If you try to serve them the same way you serve them at an elementary level, you're gonna be confused. If you are benchmarking 3 times a year 8th graders, are you kidding me? Why in the world would you be doing that? Benchmarking is not 3 times a year screening. Believe me, I began the concept of benchmarking in Minneapolis schools in 1982 as a process of developing local norms. It was never intended to be 3 times a year screening. It was intended to be growth and development, to be able to show that kids grow fall, winter, spring. Even at the elementary level, a kid who's a good reader in 3rd grade is not going to be an at-risk reader the next time you test them. Anybody who says screening 3 times a year is confused. You don't screen 3 times a year. You assess growth and development 3 times a year. And the fact that we continue this 3 times a year testing in middle school and in high school is ludicrous. What a waste of time and energy and money. Have you seen schools cancel instruction because they're doing benchmarking? Oh, we're doing our 8th grade benchmarking, so 7th graders can't get instruction. Well, the library's tied up. The computers are... What? What? That's confusing to me. So we're going to talk about a bunch of things here in our short period of time. And here's the ground rules. Interrupt me, please. The interrupting rules go like this. Raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand. Let's practice. Say, hey, Mark. Hey, Mark. Okay. Unless you're a lawyer. Do we have any lawyers in the room? Do we have any physicians in the room? Okay, everybody else call me, hey, Mark. Okay? Or yell at me, hey, Mark. Okay? I was in a court case in California on behalf of parents with disabilities. Unfortunately, on behalf of parents against a prominent school district because they were discriminating against kids with disabilities pretty badly. And the judge encouraged the school district to settle. The lawyers wanted me to answer yes or no. And almost always my answer was, well, sorta. Sometimes. Usually. Well, and they wanted yes or no, and my revenge was call me doctor. The second part will be, so what do we do about this? Okay, and I want you to have a few takeaways. Okay, because the takeaways are about all you're going to get. Okay, so the first takeaway is you can't figure out what you're going to do until you figure out who you serve. Okay. Who you serve, okay, and who you don't serve. Our takeaway this morning will be we need to differentiate who we treat and who we support. Who we treat, and it's kind of a funny word, treat sounds like a medical model, but who do we treat and who do we support? Because there's lots of kids who need help, right? It's an endless supply. Every kid needs support. But some kids need direct and explicit instruction. Direct and explicit instruction, not help with homework. A lot of kids need help with homework, but help with homework does not have a major effect. Okay, so let's see if I can advance a slide here somehow, because it was working before and now I'm working that I've lost my connection because I'm talking too much. Because now it says my wife is teaching class. So I guess I better go back to this part, which I really hate to stand here. Okay, so part 1, maybe this will come back to life. Okay, this is terrible. Everything was working so well with my fancy little watch.
Do you want to flip her?
Oh, no, it doesn't, that part doesn't work. Okay, so part 2 will be, how do we serve them? Okay? And we'll have a little takeaway there, which will be that we want to intervene as soon as we can, as hard as we can, as long as we can. But that's for later. Okay, I really don't like this brightness contrast, but you know, what do you do? So here's the deal. Most secondary MTSS looks like somebody just took the blueprint for elementary and photocopied it and then said that's what we're going to do just going down the road. No, it doesn't work that way, right? We all know that. But that's what we've continued to do. It doesn't work very well and we sort of give up, or we just don't even bother trying at all. So it starts with this. We have to have a shared vision. Secondary has to have a shared vision between special education and general ed. Now I know people don't like to talk that way. MTSS is not special ed. It's not, okay? But it is. Don't let anybody kid you that if you have your special ed doing business as usual and you're trying to build MTSS, guess what? You're not going to build an MTSS system. Because if special ed continues to be a place where you can just say, well, kids get special ed business as usual, where kids have those same lame IEPs, and the kids' interventions are co-teaching, where somebody comes into the classroom, helps them with homework, or the kids get study hall, okay, and we give them some help with homework and study hall as part of their IEPs. And we have meetings for the 3-year reevaluations. Oh my God. With the same 3 reevaluations like we did 20 or 30 years ago, you're not going to build MTSS. Because special ed will be a system designed for adults to meet the needs of adults and not the needs of kids. So, as we think shared vision, we're going to have to change the rules of the game. That special education, when students need it, provides appropriately intensive, direct instruction for the kids who need it. It is not just some sort of like, yeah, you got some paperwork. You have to have the will to be able to build those services and give teachers the tools they need to get the job done. The fastest turnover in the field of education is a secondary special education teacher. If you last very long, you've got resilience. You've got an incredible passion for kids that keep you in the business because it's incredibly tough. Connection lost. Well, thank you for telling me that. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff that I've done. You don't need to do that. You can read that, okay? Not like it's particularly important or interesting, but I've been around. Mostly you can tell because I'm really old. Okay, but more importantly, I've got kids. I got a wife. She works in school improvement. After 20-some years as a principal, she does this every day. She runs into the barriers of some parents who want Freedom of Information Acts on every single thing the schools are doing. Oh, brother, she doesn't get a chance to do much school improvement because she's dealing with Freedom of Information Acts about who's teaching this and who's teaching that and blah, 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 blah. It's tough. I don't envy her at all. But I also have, where are you? Class of 2017. 504 plan. Type 1 diabetes. I let him down because I didn't advocate for him like I would for any other kid because I'm a professor. I didn't want to come off as a jerk. If it would have been your kid, I want to see his quiz score performance. Well, it's our school policy that we don't share test score results with parents. Well, how am I supposed to know what he's getting right or wrong? Well, it's our school policy we don't share test results with parents. But how am I supposed to get him the help he needs if I don't know what he's getting right or wrong? It's our school. What kind of school policy would not let a parent see on a test what a kid did not get right or wrong on an algebra test? Now, am I going to go out and photocopy that algebra test and disseminate it to parents? As part of a 504, wouldn't I be willing to sign a test security? Wouldn't a school trust me? No. And guess what I did? I just said, okay. I've been on that end where advocacy, I think, was tempered because of other constraints. And my wife, who's the toughest person in the world, probably didn't advocate as she would for somebody else. We lived and breathed a kid who was not connected to his school. And you know what school connection means today, gang? The importance of being connected to school and risk. What does that mean? How do we know kids are connected to their school? What's one of the single most important things we want our kids at middle school and high school to feel? Social emotional learning. We talk social emotional learning, but how do we make efforts to assess whether those kids feel connected? Or are we just talking the game? Now, it's easy for me to say that, right? But what are our efforts to really build in efforts to try to make sure kids feel connected? Because guess what most kids are going to say? Yeah, sure. Okay? Now, there's my oldest son. He too went to high school. And I asked him, which teacher inspired you? And he said, what do you mean? I said, which teacher inspired you, Peter? Which one? He did not have Mr. Olson like I did. Mr. Ringsrud. Or Mrs. Carlson. I can remember them. He didn't. That's weird. And then, that's not my grandkid, gang. Jeez. I want another kid. Whoop. He's a sophomore. And you know what? He's experiencing high school too. And guess what I do every day? Drive him to school, pick him up. How was school today? Okay. What'd you do in school today? Nothing. What was the highlight of your day? What do you mean? Did you color today? Yes. And I shake my head and go like, are you kidding me? He's coloring almost every day. He colored Virginia last week. And he colored the colony of Massachusetts last week. Now, I understand the challenges of being a teacher. I've been a teacher a long time. I have taught college freshman teachers, over 1,000 college freshman teachers. Freshman year, fall quarter, many of whom did not want to be there. Many of whom probably shouldn't have been there. And not a single student failed my class. Not because my class was easy. People were scared of my classes. And boy, you know, I know what it was like when I didn't have to teach. Snow days, I loved them. God, when I didn't have to teach, I just loved them. Now some of you, who's here? You know, I can't believe I have this. Somebody has to take a picture of this, by the way, when I'm done, before you all leave, because I want to send it back to my wife and my kids. It said somebody actually came. I'm serious. Thank you. I'm guessing most of you are middle school, high school people. Yeah, teachers, English teachers. Why should kids read literature? Yeah, I'm.
Because I ask my kids this at the beginning of every year.
I think they read literature to connect them to other people and other places and other times and learn what it was like in those places and those times and with those people.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
So tonight as you're reading this, you should come to class tomorrow with something that you've read that you can tell me connects you to blah, blah, blah. That's called a big idea. And in the second session, we'll talk about teaching with a big idea and coming back to that theme like a symphony. That big idea. That's why you're reading it. Come back tomorrow because that's what we'll be talking about. We have some English teachers, math teachers. Got one? Good for you. Middle school math teacher? Yes. Oh my God. The hardest job of all teachers in the world. Yes. I'm serious. If you think teaching English is hard, because you got kids who can't read and write, you got kids who have been socially endorsed that you don't have to be good at math. And especially still in 2023, as a gender issue, that girls don't have to be good at math. Still in 2023, we have girls don't have to be good at math. What? Are you kidding me? Unbelievable. And the spread that you are faced with, if you have a spread like this in English, in terms of reading and writing skills, in math, you can't measure that spread. You can't. And you got to deal with that variability. Unbelievable. We have school psychologists, right? And here we have some pioneers that are actually providing the kinds of services that kids are needing. Cool. Now, as we think about some of this stuff, what can we get done here today in our time? This group, what can you do? Click, click. Disclosure, I don't make any money from anybody pays me anymore. They used to. You know, I used to make money from Pearson and Ames Webb, and I used to work, you know, in the old days in development of pre-dibbles and Cambium and a bunch of other stuff, but I don't do that stuff anymore because they don't pay me. But guess what? I will name some program names. Because you know what? I'm tired about hearing of instruction. I'm tired about hearing that we need research-based instruction. What I want to hear is we need really good research-based programs. I'm tired of people saying that you can't buy a good program in a box. Really? Who says that? You know what? You're only as good as tools in the toolbox, gang. And there's some incredibly good research-based programs that have been field tested that are better than you can make and better than I can make. And every time I try to teach my kid, myself, my wife, here's the predictable thing. Every time I try to teach my kid with what I know, here's what happens. In 20 minutes, I'm yelling at my kid. And I can make my kids cry. I can. And do I want to make my kids cry? Dominic, no. That's not how you do it. Don't do it that way. But Dad, you're confusing me. No, I'm not confusing you. You're raising your voice, Dad. No, I'm not raising my voice. And here's the other thing. My wife is yelling at me. Mark, why don't you practice what you preach? Get one of your programs that you have in your library and use it. And then all of a sudden, teaching becomes easier. I will name names, but nobody pays me. Okay? Now, they don't do that because they're the programs. Anybody heard of Third Quest? That's a pretty good program. Anybody heard of Read to Achieve? That's a pretty good program. Anybody heard of Corrective Reading? That's a pretty good program. Anybody heard of Essentials to Algebra? Oh, that's a brilliant program. I don't make money. Nobody pays me. Now, you might want to ask, why do I like those? Because they're research-based and you can explore why somebody might like them. Okay, so think about them. All right, now, the things I'm going to be talking about today in both sessions ain't new. Developed and field tested initially beginning in 1983. 1983, gang. Man, that's before some of you were born. They've been around a long time. And you can read about them for free. Now see that teeny little short URL there? It's big. Okay? This is a Dropbox location. And this Dropbox location is my Dropbox location. It has no fees. Okay? It's also in the handouts, which are on this conference's website. Okay? The handouts are here for both sessions. They'll have every single slide, not like the slides are really important, but this URL has tons of readings on the topic of secondary and then a bunch of other topics that are related to MTSS, okay? And if anybody reads some of them by Stephen Graham, Michael Camel, Joe Torgerson, there are so many things. And if anybody reads these two and you find me again, I'll buy you a beer, a glass of wine. This is the most brilliant man in the field of education. A guy named Gary Grimmer. Smartest guy, kindest guy, most gracious guy, and the guy that really started all the stuff that became MTSS in about 1978, 1979 in a small rural co-op north of the Twin Cities. And if you want something that'll bring you to tears, read this. Impending Thoughts. This is what I built my teacher education class around. I built my teacher education class on the science of teaching what you need to know to become a teacher from a research-based perspective on a letter to his kids. Pretty cool. So what are we going to do here today? I used to describe myself as young, idealistic, and naive. Some of you in this room are young, idealistic, and naive. I sure hope so, because you can't work in school improvement unless at least you're idealistic and a lot of naive, right? Right? You gotta be, right? But you know what? The young part is gone. And that's me now. It's my self-portrait. I'm old and grouchy. This is my last survey when I was here in Pennsylvania about implementation of MTSS. And I asked, you know, where are you in terms of your middle school, in terms of MTSS implementation? And are you fully implemented? And you know what? It was about 9%. This was, I think, 2021. And, you know, how about initial implementation? Dabbling, I call it, about a third. Foundation building, that means like, you know, we got a couple things that we're doing. And then, hey, nobody's interested. What about high school? High school? High school? Well, high school just wasn't interested at all, I guess. Lost my connection. There we go. High school wasn't much different. Widespread passivity, if not resistance. And here's the question. If you are a high school history teacher, you have to ask yourself, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What do I get out of this deal? And unless there's some clear message like, what's in it for me, why would people be interested? And I have some things that I think are really kind of interesting, maybe in the second session that we could talk about. Like, did you know that I'm a much better teacher than I used to be? If you can imagine how bad I used to be, it's pretty disgusting. But I actually had some coaching by people like Randy Sprick and Doug Carnine, and one of the things that I learned to do was add a couple little things like this. And this is really expensive professional learning I'm going to help you with. Somebody taught me to say this. This is really important to know. Did you know that in 25 years of teaching, I never said this is really important to know? It was not part of my standard teaching routine. And the other part was, you don't really need to know this. This is just a story. Did you know how much that improved my teaching? Because I had students that were writing down everything that I said. And I had students that didn't write down a darn thing that I said. And when I could distill what was really important to know, student learning increased. And when I had students that when I said, this is just a story, just listen, I had increased engagement. This is really important to know. And when I learned to teach from a big ideas focus, like, okay, come to class tomorrow, linking up something you read tonight to how this teaches you about something, whatever. That really distilled student learning. Well, we've got a ways to go here in Pennsylvania, and guess what? Pennsylvania is farther ahead than pretty much everywhere else that I've worked. Now, I'm going to give you, I hope this works, this is technology, I'm going to have you listen for a minute to a student reading a 7th grade passage. And I want you to raise your hand when you've heard enough to be able to gauge and answer a simple question. Is this student a proficient reader? Raise your hand.
When I say begin, I want you to read across the page. Try to read each word. If you come to a word you don't know, I'll tell it to you. Be sure to do your best reading. Are there any questions?
Nope.
Begin.
After moving to Newtown, 9 years old Samantha and her 12-year-old brother Robert had heard of an old toboggan slide from some of the other neighborhood children. They decided they need to check it out. So suddenly, what is this word?
Raise your hand high.
Supposedly,
It was on the north side of the Pedal Street and the middle school of the lake behind their new home. Paddling lazily, they had across the lake in their canoe. Just as they had been told, there was the decrepit wooden frame toboggan slide. They slid it.
stop.
That was a minute. There were a lot of hands raised, about 30 seconds. This student is not a proficient reader. Not even close. It doesn't take long to find kids who don't read very well. You don't need to sit in front of a computer for 45 minutes with an adaptive test. You don't need to do it for years and years and years. The question I have is this one. Do you have kids like this in your high school? Your high school. Do you have kids like this in your middle school? Does this kid have basic skills? No. This kid is in 11th grade. Now, how did this kid get to 11th grade and still have a basic skill reading problem? Have we collected tons of data on this kid over the years? Massive amounts of data on this kid. Kid's been in the district for years. It doesn't take lots and 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 lots of data to figure out that this kid doesn't read very well. Now, you know what? I call this test grandma's test. I'm not trying to be sexist here. But we've known for 40 years, if you want to know how well a kid reads, listen to them. A simple short sample of oral reading, reading curriculum-based measurement, standardized research-based beginning in work at the University of Minnesota by Stan Dino and his research team, including Lynn Fuchs, me, Jerry Tyndall, Doug Marston, and others. Now a feature of pretty much every major commercial vendor, AimsWeb, Dibbles, FastBridge, Map has one, everybody's got one. Now blended into a whole bunch of other stuff that you really don't need, put into composite scores that you really don't need, put into diagnostic tests that you really don't need, especially at middle school and high school. Let's keep it simple, gang. This secondary student, when they get out of elementary school, getting intervention is almost impossible. Why? They encounter schedules. Now, nobody does this on purpose, gang. It's nobody's fault. I'm not pointing fingers. You didn't do it. You didn't do it. You didn't make it this way. But here's what happens. They get schedules. They get orange days, B days, late start days. My son does not have the same schedule any 2 days in a row in high school. What's that about? Well, late start days, Wednesdays and Thursdays, so students can access teachers for additional help. My son's never exploited that one. Late start days. I wonder, how do kids who don't have access to transportation get to school on late start days? That's always intrigued me. Well, guess what? He's got Duber. That's me, Dad Uber. But you know what? The schedules are goofy. Now, I'm not saying the kid has to have a regular schedule, same thing I'm not saying that, right? But you know how complicated it is to schedule intervention? Well, guess what else you get? I hope. Separate classes. Okay, it's no longer one teacher or anything, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, it's just complicated. Oh, shorter periods. 38 minutes. What's the shortest period you've encountered? The shortest one I've encountered is 38. Okay, but 38, not 40. 38. Specialized content teachers who, guess what? I teach algebra. I don't teach remedial math or intervention math. And guess what? I get that, but it's hard. Curtains. I call them curtains. Thou shalt not interfere with my curtain. This is what I do. Do not interfere with the wall here, or the curtain. And I get that too. But it makes life really difficult. So the quandary, and I've got some questions for you here. If you look at school level, the severity of the problem and the intensity of the intervention, this is our participation period here. Okay, elementary, come on. The elementary, let's say the kid's got a serious, what we call performance discrepancy. Let's just take reading. And let's say the intensity of intervention is intense, okay? Let's just start that as a baseline. Okay, now the kid goes to middle school, and I don't know why that's sort of not coming out very well. How would you describe the intervention relative to elementary? Is the intervention, or is the academic problem at middle school for the same kid, is it typically less serious than it was at elementary? About the same or more serious? More serious, okay? And then how would you describe the intensity of intervention that they get? Is it the same, less, or more intense? Okay, so the problem is more severe, but we intervene less intense. So what would you expect for that by the time the kid gets to high school? The severity of the problem, would you expect it to be more severe? Okay, and what would you expect then? What does the intervention look like typically? Less. Okay, right? So just think about that. The outcome, unintended outcome, okay, the unintended outcome is by the time the kid gets to high school, you've got the most serious problem with the least intensive intervention. Now, who designed the system? None of us in this room. What's the predictable outcome? For the student, what is the interest in school? For a teacher, is this a student who is easy to teach? Can you imagine how resilient that student would have to be? Okay, I now have a pretty darn serious performance discrepancy. The interventions are not very powerful. I'm still here, or maybe I'm not. Maybe this part isn't here. Maybe my body is here, but my brain ain't. Or maybe I'm just not here. Maybe I'm dropped out. What are the odds of a kid who has a serious performance discrepancy being in school, their 12th grade? What is the odds of a kid with a special education label dropping out? How much more likely are they to drop out than a kid without that special education label? It's scary. Here's what we need to do. We need to change somehow this system. Nobody designed it this way, but this is how it works. And MTSS can do that. And it starts by how we identify kids, who we serve, and how we serve them. And that collaboration between general ed and special ed. Who we serve and how we serve them. And who we serve is very straightforward if we set our minds to it. Who we serve does not have to be a kid with a disability. We can put the disability model aside and serve kids with what we call performance discrepancies. Severe performance discrepancies. And part of what bothers me in MTSS is we don't have a dictionary. We don't have a set of common terms. And even in special ed, it bothers me. We don't have a set of commonly used terms like performance discrepancy and progress discrepancy. Because to be eligible for special ed, as we will see under RTI, is we need a performance discrepancy and a progress discrepancy. These are what are called part of the inclusionary components, that together with instructional need or need for special education form the inclusionary components for special education eligibility, together with, listen to my language, the determinant factors and the exclusionary components. We have three things that go into SLD identification, of which there's subcomponents. And we can learn these languages, this language, and take them apart, and all of us become consistent if we want to improve a system. Right now we're stuck. MTSS, this is what I see when we try to solve the problem. We have a kid doing poorly in social studies and we make a referral. The student historically has been tested. The student becomes eligible, and what they get in special education ain't much. Help with homework, extended time, co-teaching, and don't take it wrong, because I'm all for inclusion to the greatest degree possible, aligned to the student needs. But I see inclusion being solely a return to the general education classroom with a paraprofessional who might help them with their homework. Okay? I wish that were not true. And I know there are places where that is not true. Hopefully in Pennsylvania. But more often than not, this is what I have seen in the old system. And when people do MTSS, all I see is relabeling. Well, now we're doing MTSS, but it's the exact same service delivery system, just relabeled. And so when I go out and see secondary MTSS, I go back and just say, oh my, it's just relabeling. Because it's easier. So, what are you doing for MTSS at the secondary level? Well, rebranding. And I want Patton and I want Pennsylvania to continue to lead and continue to push the boundaries and do it even better. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Here's what we're going to do. Identify students with performance discrepancies. Severe performance discrepancies in basic skills. Basic skills like reading. And we will identify students with a basic skill discrepancy in reading with a simple oral reading test. It's easy. Now we can get into, not today, what about comprehension? Oh, good grief. Comprehension of what? Comprehension is content related, and it's messy, and you can't give a test for it. Would you like to do comprehension of taxes? I don't understand. Sadly, I can't do my own taxes. I can't even fill out a basic tax form. I don't understand it. I'm not stupid, but I can't understand taxes. I don't have the background knowledge, and frankly, I don't have the motivation. Did you know that motivation is a strong component of comprehension? I don't care. It's hard. I don't want to be bothered. It's too much work. Comprehension, and there's a wonderful, absolutely wonderful re-release of a presentation that Reed Lyon did, I don't know if you just saw it, he re-released it. It was done like 25 years ago, a set of slides he presented. It's on the Reading League, I just got it through a grapevine group of people that I know. And it summarizes everything that we know about reading research. And here's a slide by Joe Torgerson on comprehension. This is off topic, but it's a slide that I've used for about 25 years of Joe Torgerson's, and it has all the issues that go into comprehension. And everybody that's interested in reading and reading comprehension should take a look at it. It's unbelievable. It puts all of that stuff aside. You need to be able to read to be able to understand. And then comprehension has a whole bunch of other stuff into it, okay? But what we want to be able to do is, again, let's start with a performance discrepancy. Got it? Don't make my connection list. And we want to call this performance discrepancy one of minimum basic skill proficiency. We're going to have our Anita Archer moment. Everybody, what do we call this? On my signal, minimum basic skill proficiency. This is a term that Alan Coulter and the gang of young Turks in the state of Tennessee, when we had a contract in 2015 to roll out statewide their secondary MTSS plan. This is how we labeled it. Minimum basic skill proficiency. At the secondary level, we serve kids who have a discrepancy in their minimum basic skill proficiency. Doesn't that make sense? These are the kids that we serve. If you are below minimum basic skill proficiency, what do you need? Intervention. Okay, makes sense. We've got something we can align our services to. Oh, who are you serving? Well, kids who are below our minimum basic skill proficiency. These are kids that need intervention. Now the challenge becomes, how do we define minimum basic skill proficiency? We'll come back to that. Now these are kids that often, not always, but often do poorly in content area classes. They can't write very well, they don't spell very well, they certainly don't read very well, because this is a constellation of things that go together. Now I'm not going to talk about math because I don't have time, but it goes the same way. There's a set of minimum basic skills you need in the standard mathematics algorithms. If you don't have those, you can't do much. Standard mathematic algorithms, okay? But I need to use only a single example because we don't have the time to do much of anything. These kids are tough to teach. It makes the job of teaching difficult. Now my takeaway for you for secondary teachers is what's in it for secondary teachers for MTSS. MTSS makes the difficult job of teaching a little easier. What are we doing MTSS at the secondary level? For teachers, it's to make the difficult job of teaching a little bit easier. Because you know what? If your kids have better basic skills, your job's a little easier. And that's what we want to be able to market when we do MTSS. I mean, it's frightening for me to think of my son's teachers teaching 4, 5, or 6 sections of kids like my son every day. My son's a good kid. You know, he's an above average student. He's getting B's and sometimes A's. But he's disinterested in school. And he's not alone. He's got Freddie next to him. Freddie's a really bright, interesting kid, but Freddie's interesting. When he's not engaged, he's engaged with other stuff. He's a fun kid. So, here's, got fleshed over. These kids, and here's the challenge. How can we provide them the appropriately intensive basic skill interventions? And here's my takeaway. We would do this as an Anita Archer moment, but it's faded away. As soon as we can, as long as we can, okay? As intensively as we can, okay? And we'll do that in our second session, okay? And we're going to make it as simple as we can. We're going to hone down everything that we don't need out of our system. We're going to cull our assessment system down. Down, rid of it, get rid of it. We're going to cut as much stuff out of our system so we can do this as long as we can. And you know, some of these kids may need special ed. Some of these kids may need the protections, the assurances that special ed provides. Special ed provides protections, provisions, the 2 P's. Protections and provisions. And I believe that some kids and families need those protections and provisions, but not all of them. So where do we go from here? So as we think, elementary, when we define what that performance discrepancy is, at the elementary, and this is an important thing to know. We define the performance discrepancy normatively. That is compared to other kids. The IDEA says for special education under SLD, compared to other kids, that's not exactly kids, okay, but it says, normatively, a normative performance discrepancy. Secondary students have a standards-based discrepancy. And that's the fundamental difference. When we talk about minimum basic skills, that is a standards-based discrepancy. That is also in the IDEA. Elementary, normative, secondary, standards. And here's what it looks like if you want to do a little kind of a graphic thing. This is adapted a little bit from Lynn Fuchs. So if we get a normative discrepancy, here's a student that we have concerns about. Here's other kids. When that discrepancy is big enough, that discrepancy from other kids, that kid needs intervention. And if that discrepancy is severe enough and not responsive enough to appropriately intensive intervention, that kid may be eligible for special ed. But it's compared to other kids. Got it? When we talk about what it looks like, and this is an old, see 2002 Edformation before it was acquired by Pearson. This is an old Ames web graph. If this is normative, what typical kids, this is kids in their bottom quarter, this is kids in their bottom 10th percentile, this is kids way below the 10th percentile. This kid has a severe performance discrepancy compared to other kids. A normative performance discrepancy. This kid, together with a progress discrepancy, may be eligible, okay? But certainly this normative performance discrepancy says intervene, elementary. Now when we get into secondary, it's different. It's a standard of proficiency that we're saying the kid is discrepant from. We define that standard of proficiency by some level of minimum basic skills. How proficient do we want kids to be able to be? And so we could say we'd like this kid to be able to be proficient as well as an end of grade 6 or end of grade 7. We could say end of grade 8, but that would be... You'd have you'd have 2/3 of people in the United States. And I ain't joking. I'm not joking. The question becomes, and of course, ultimately, a standard is normatively defined, right? When you sit down and say, how proficient do you want people to be? It's ultimately normative, but let's not go there. This is what old normative standards would look like. This is how well nationally, how well end of 7th graders read, okay? This is how well a typical end of 7th grader, reads about 170 words a minute correctly. A low average reads about 150. A kid who reads less than 150 words a minute correctly on a 7th grade text is below average. A kid who reads, oh my goodness, 130 words a minute correct on the 7th grade passage is below the 10th percentile. That's pretty bad reading. I hate to say bad, but it's a big performance discrepancy. Now you can look, and everybody's got how well kids at end of grade 6 read, end of grade 5, but the question becomes establishing that normative discrepancy. So when I asked people, and of course, let's see if I can go back. When I asked a group of school psychologists what they defined as minimum basic skill proficiency, the most common answer was end of grade 6. But these are the things that we debate. What do we believe would be the standard of minimum basic skill proficiency? Because there's really no science to it. You could go out and do research and say, okay, kids above here get A's, kids above here. But I'm going to argue that ultimately it comes down to a value decision. Which kids do we serve in MTSS? Secondary, we draw our line and say kids below this standard need intervention. We keep it simple. And then we provide the best possible intervention that we can. And we end up with a basic idea that we define our services by the kids that we treat and the kids that we support. And this takeaway that I'd like you to get familiar with, to be comfortable with, besides who we serve, the students with minimum basic skill performance discrepancies, is our goal is to figure out which kids we treat and which kids we support.
Hey, Mark, we have a question.
I hope.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes, so I know you're moving on to the next group, but I want to make sure
That's
the
fine.
question gets good.
This is a good point for us to actually do that.
Hey Mark, the question is, when we're looking and thinking about students, whether they need support or treatment, while those are occurring, what kinds of provisions should be in IEPs to help address content area reading so that when kids are in those areas where they're in content areas with that literature, or that content area reading, that they can access the text?
That's a good question for part 2. And second, I hate the word access. I think we should eliminate the word access. You know, I have access to a Ferrari. Hey, there's one. I see it. What does that mean to have access? I hate that term. What does that mean? Access. Access, what does that mean? I don't even know what that means. Okay? So I would first, they're not picking on you, right?
I like it.
Yeah. You like that term?
I like that you're picking on me.
Oh, no, not you. I'm not picking on you. I'm picking on that term. But I have no clue what that means. Do I want that student to be able to read and understand? Ooh, now we're talking. Okay? So I want that student to be able to gain, do I want that student to be able to, English teacher?
To understand the connection to others.
Yeah. Do I want to be able to, to get the big, if I want that student to get the big ideas from those texts, absolutely, okay? But is that an IEP goal? I don't know. That might be a general ed goal, okay? But if that student does not have an IEP goal, if that student has a performance discrepancy in basic skills, if that student doesn't have a IEP goal that says that student will be reading 150 words a minute correct in a 7th grade passage and is not getting an intervention to support that IEP goal, we are remiss. Because otherwise we're just given access. Here's your Ferrari. See it, wave at it. What are we doing? We're passing the problem along like we always have. We're providing access, smiling at it. Okay, and that's not you, right? But that's what we've been doing for how many years now? Providing access. The system's broken. How many kids at a high school are we providing access to? How many kids are we providing direct, powerful, early intervention to?
So just to kind of, the second part of Amy's question, so Amy's one of our TAC from one of our IUs, so she's a friend of ours, is how did they then move to supporting that student? So we have the goal, we're looking at kind of making sure that we're remediating those basic skills, but how do we move the support in those other content domains or other courses so that that student can get both beneficially?
It's what do the content area teachers need in terms of their instructional repertoires. Okay? And this is the part that most of us have not been taught how to do. So most of us have not been taught how to teach from a big ideas focus. Most of us have not been taught how to teach the essential vocabulary for content area success, which, by the way, is part of the content of the second one. But did you know that the things we do to support kids with performance discrepancies increase achievement for kids with IEPs, increase achievement for kids at risk, increase achievement for kids that are doing okay, increase achievement for kids that are doing above average, and increase achievement for kids who are doing really, really, really well. But nobody taught those things to us as part of our teacher ed program. Oh, darn.
I know, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you. It's terrible. So we are going to be just kind of completing this session. We do want to make sure that if you are part of the NASP group, don't forget to scan the code on the way out. You'll want to make sure that because you do that on the way in and then you do that on the way out. I want to thank Dr. Shin Mark, for all of his wonderful expertise. The next session will begin in about 15 minutes. Dr. Shin is moving to Empire D, so he's just moving from this room to another one.
Please, wait.
Oh, wait. Yep, he wants the picture.
I need evidence. Please wave. Thank you, everybody.